course, everyone here will be very familiar to all of you and will need only a brief introduction. And Tara Moss, as she explained as we were standing here earlier, is probably the only one on this panel who does know how to kill you or kill someone, having trained in forensic science and all manner of kind of frightening, what's the generic term?
I specialise in murder. I mean, I write about it. I write about it, but yeah, I'm probably the only one here who could.
But it's also a hobby.
It's a hobby. Yeah, you have to take these careers seriously.
Even though we want to kill her because she's so beautiful, sisterhood is powerful, but she has to die.
Yeah.
She is a best-selling novelist, a TV presenter, and a journalist. She's written novels with the most brilliant names of Fetish, Split, Covet, Hit, Siren, The Blood Countess, and The Spider Goddess. She's published in 17 countries in 11 languages and is also a Goodwill ambassador for UNICEF and for breastfeeding. She's got another aptly named novel coming up called Assassin. And of course, we are all familiar with Emily Maguire, who has long been a young writer on the scene and writing about very important books about female sexuality. Her book, Taming the Beast, her first novel, she started out with the subject was sex between a young woman and a high school teacher. The Gospel according to Luke was the relationship between a young Christian pastor and an atheist abortion clinic. She doesn't shy away from the controversial subject. And then went on to has written some non-fiction, including Princesses and Porn Stars, which is about the way we debate and talk about girls and their power or otherwise when it comes to their sexuality. And of course, we're very familiar with her articles and essays on sex, feminism and literature in The Monthly and the Sydney Morning Herald, where I was delighted to publish you. Cathy Deveny calls herself a so-called comedian on her Twitter page. She's a writer, she's a social commentator and author, a prolific tweeter. She's written many columns. She appears on ABC Radio. You would have seen her on Q&A. And her one-woman show, which sold out at the Melbourne Comedy Festival, called, non-provocatively, God is Bullshit. And her seventh book, first novel, The Happiness Show. I love that she describes herself as living in an atheist kibbutz with her partner and gay husband.
And my gay husband's second wife has just moved in. So my gay husband has 2 wives, we're both straight, me, who has a boyfriend, and another wife. Well, he calls her his wife, and she's moved in. So now I live with my partner, my gay husband, and his straight wife. And so I think we're polygamous. So it's completely clear. Kibbutz. Yeah, but it's our kibbutz.
And Cathy Lette, of course, is an iconic and much-loved Australian writer who had a dream tonight that at tonight's event she would at some point stand on the table and take all her clothes off. And she said, it's funny because I don't think that was an anxiety dream, I think it was a prediction.
I think it was a fantasy. I think it was a fantasy.
So
the lighting's too high.
We get our money's worth.
Dimmer switch, greatest sex aid known to womankind. Yeah.
The novel Puberty Blues affected an entire. It's actually at least 2 or 3 generations of us growing up in Australia, and the way it talks so candidly about the experiences of young girls and their sexuality. And of course now she has achieved global renown as a columnist and as a writer, and her bestsellers, of which there are 10, including Fetal Attraction, Mad Cows and How to Kill Your Husband.
Another handy household hint.
We'll have to talk later.
Yeah.
And she's also living in London and visiting us now. So the feminist supremacy question mark. I think one of the things that we were discussing beforehand in the green room was there's been so many panels about the death of feminism that we've all sat on over the last 10 years discussing, is it over? Are we post or post? Is it something we've lost interest in? Has the word lost its meaning? And now suddenly there seems to be a revived interest, and all kinds of peculiar or, so let's say, non-predictable people are claiming the title. If we look at the definition that Rebecca West gave, for example, 150 years ago.
Oh, yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I love that.
Right? And she says, I don't know what a feminist is, but I do know whenever I say something that differentiates myself from a doormat, I get called one.
Yes.
And then if you compare it to, say, Caitlin Moran, who I've been completely fascinated by her success, who's a British author and comic, and she says, I don't know. I think the best way to tell if you're a feminist is to put your hands down your pants, say, do I have a vagina? If you do, and do I want to be in charge of it? If you answer yes to both of those questions, then you're a feminist. And this is something I'd like to kind of open up to the panel, because what is it, what was the moment at which you realised that you were or weren't a feminist? And then what did it mean to you to be a feminist? Do you want to start, Kate?
Oh, well, for me, it was definitely lying in the back of a panel van at Cronulla. Because, I mean, I'm sure many of the women here have an imprint of a steering wheel in their backs. Because the Australian men I grew up with, they thought sex drive meant doing it in the car. But possibly because of that little sign on the rear vision mirror that says, objects in this mirror may appear larger than they are. Yeah. And also, they were the sort of guys who disproved the theory of evolution. They were evolving into apes. And their terms for sex were rooting, tooling, stabbing, plugging, poking, and meat injecting. It's not exactly a Shakespearean love sonnet, is it? So I think that was probably when I thought, am I more than a life support system to a pair of breasts and a vagina? Maybe I am. Yeah.
So that was me. So you were saying, I don't want to be defined simply sexually, but also passively sexually. Is that what you were saying?
Yes.
What was feminism then to you?
Well, we belonged to the boys. The trouble was, I started thinking, why? As an example of how sexist they were and how we were just objects, they used to get us to cut their names out in paper and sticky tape them to our stomachs. And then sunbake, so we get a tan tattoo in the shape of their names. So, if ever I get cancer, I'll have a melanoma called Bruce. And, you start to think, is that all I am? Am I an object that belongs to these men, like a human handbag draped over their arms, demure and decorative? And no.
And of course, there's something essentially feminist, I think, which is common to all of the writers on this panel, about telling your story and about telling the story of a woman is in of itself can often be a subversive act, and that was exactly what you did.
Yeah, well, that book was only written for, I wrote it with another girlfriend. We wrote it for our girlfriends, so they would get some objectivity on what was happening to them, because at that age you don't have any objectivity. And I had no idea that it was going to become such a big cult hit, and to go from non-entity to overnight notoriety and being famous for talking about sex in the back of panel vans. My mother was thrilled, what can I say? Yeah.
And what about you, Kathy?
This is a really hard one to answer, because I'm just having a whole lot of things coming to me at once. She's just about to take her clothes off. She always takes off. Starts with the earrings. She'll be nuding up and she will be streaking. That's what we need at Writers' Festival. More streaking. Don't you reckon?
I agree, yeah.
So what jumped out to me when look, I spent an hour every Sunday for the first 18 years of my life sitting in a medieval torture chamber listening to a bloke bang on about his imaginary friend in the sky who did magic tricks when no one was watching. Okay, men were gods, the son of God, made in the image of God, and women were virgins, martyrs and whores. And it was in church that I just kept thinking, why is it that there is a disproportionate amount of middle-aged, middle-class, white, straight or straight-acting, God-fearing or pretending men who have access to power, control, decision-making, leisure and money? I do remember never understanding, going, why do everybody have their father's surname? That was a very big thing that I just never understood.
You were conscious of that at what age?
I'll go back to church, because when I think about it, I think about the priests. I think about sitting in the rows of all the families, the Devenys, the Lippiots, the McHales and stuff. And so why do we have our, names? When I was 4, I remember there was a girl who sat behind us at church. She was 15 and she got pregnant. I'm 43. I know, it's hard to believe. I use a cream. And it was 1972. And she got pregnant and she was married off. and she was married off on a Sunday afternoon. She wasn't allowed to wear a white dress because she wasn't a bride. She had to wear an orange caftan. And she had got herself in trouble, but the guy was doing the right thing by marrying her. I was very aware of this. I was 4. I was just about to become a flower girl. It was the closest I've ever got to marriage. And, you know, because when you have a big mouth, men don't want to, you know, have sex with you. It's not true. I have heaps of sex. And I do, heaps of it. That's one of the great myths. You know, they love it. But I was, you know, imagine a 4-year-old girl in the 70s with daddy issues, obsessed with marriage and brides and stuff like this. And I was about to be a flower girl, and I went along to this wedding, and there was such a kind of a feeling of shame, and we went along to support their families. Big family, they were the good family, the right family. And I remember sitting there and watching Joanne get married off, and she was 15. And I remember going home.
In her orange caftan.
Orange caftan, 1972. She was very lucky because in that year, 10,000 women in Australia had their babies taken away from them, you know, in hospitals all around Australia. So she was lucky to keep hers. And I remember, and actually, the hair is standing up on the back of my neck as I tell this story, as it always does, 4 years old. And Joanne's dad's name was Donnie. And we were driving home, and my father said, on the way home from this wedding, I feel for Donnie. And I remember wanting to jump across and grab his head and smash it into the windscreen. That he was feeling for the father. So it was all church. That's all I can think of when you ask me that question.
And feeling, firstly, that women don't have a, you know, have a more than secondary place there.
Absolutely.
And that you don't fit into that. It's just a primal kind of
that men had the access to power, men had the access to decision making, men were the ones who were right and the ones who had power, and she was being, you know, she got in trouble, done the wrong thing, but he was doing the right thing by marrying her.
It's that thing about someone being a fallen woman. Did she fall, or was she pushed?
Yeah. Or did she jump?
Yeah. And what about you, Emily?
Yeah, I kind of thought feminism was a great thing when I was growing up, but I was quite sure when I thought about it at all, which wasn't often, that it was a historical movement, that it was something that was done. So I was pretty much raised, I mean, the women around me were all fantastic and worked and seemed happy enough from my childish eyes. And something that happened to me as a teenager is I became absolutely, well, the polite term is boy crazy, but the word around school was slut. And
I was one of them too.
well, I mean, the word around school was slut before I'd ever had sex or much experience at all, because showing interest in boys, wanting to be around boys was enough. And it struck me as incredibly unfair. I had a lot of access to sexual information in terms of mechanics. I could very precisely describe how it was a woman become pregnant.
How did you have access to that information?
Oh, there was sex education at school.
Right.
Was the main way, and a few little helpful books in the home left around and sort of places. But what I didn't have was any kind of access to the thoughts of the fact that a girl might want to do that. Because even in sex education, I really remember clearly being very eager to hear in around year 9 what they were going to say, because I knew that that's when it happened, year 9 sex education, and hearing that boys would get horny and girls might feel a bit funny. And it didn't help me at all. And really, to me, the only solution seemed to be to be a slut, to embrace that identity. I didn't have any kind of idea how to kind of express my sexuality in any way, how to feel comfortable with it. No one talked about masturbation. No one talked about anything. And it was just, if I'm interested in this, this is what a slut is, I guess.
Right. So were you bucking against it and going, you know what, this is wrong? Or were you going,
no,
first
I
of all,
accepted
thinking,
it.
I feel funny?
There are two kinds of girls. There's girls like me who are into this, and then there's the girls who won't have a bar of it, and that's how it is. And it wasn't until really I was in my 20s and other things I started to notice seemed really sexist that I actually reflected back on that and started thinking, holy hell, this whole sexist thing is still really going on. And that's when I started. I was a high school dropout at that stage, and I did start reading up on it on my own, and I found so many answers in these feminist writers that explained what my experience was, but I still felt I can't be a feminist, and feminism isn't for me. I thought it was academic. I thought it was something else. Then I did. Over time, that has changed drastically, and I was probably in my late 20s before I claimed the term, and in the last, I guess, almost decade is that I would very proudly use the term and call myself a feminist activist and kind of be proud in what an incredibly diverse and inclusive movement is. But thinking of what Kathy said too, I wish I'd read Puberty Blues. I wish I'd turned to, I mean, I've since found that there's so much fiction that is just incredibly feminist, or even in terms of showing the condition of women and girls, that is so accessible to someone at that age, and it's part of what I suppose one of the reasons I write now, and writing fiction as well, is to try and get across some of those things in a way that's not academic.
Can I just say one thing? Isn't it interesting how the sexism is innate in the language? Because a man who's sexually active is still a love god, a Lothario, a Romeo, a stud-muffin. A woman who has the same sexual appetites as a man is still a slut, a tart, a mole, a tramp. It's like, you know, boys expect you to be virginal. It's like the guy always says to you, "Oh, darling, darling, am I the first man to make love to you?" To which the woman replies, "Of course. I don't know why you men keep asking the same silly question." So, you know.
I mean, but also if you take that further, you know, men have opinions, women are opinionated.
Yeah.
Men speak, women are outspoken. Men are passionate, women are mouthy. Men have mouths, women are mouthy. And it's, you know, even the term that's been, you know, as soon as you put something together like this, the word feisty comes up. I've never heard a man called feisty. You know, there are so many microaggressions in the language.
The word ambitious? When applied to a man, it's always an extreme. It's a term of praise, isn't it?
Yeah.
And when applied to women, often the word ambitious has a bit of an edge. People don't mean it in an entirely positive way, I find.
Or it's confusing if a man is not ambitious. It's just part of working. You want to do your best. And Tara, do you want to tell us about the way you think about feminism? Or?
Well, I can't pinpoint a moment when I decided that I was a feminist. I guess I had a different upbringing in the sense that my mother passed away when I was young. I became a model very young. I was traveling on my own and in countries where I didn't share the language, and I was kind of isolated, so I was reading a lot of books, but I didn't have, you know, feminist icons that I was mates with. I didn't have female role models in my life. I needed to kind of gradually seek them out. And I guess over time it began to crystallize. I realized that, you know, for instance tonight, feminism is the reason I'm sitting on this stage. It's the reason I can sit here wearing pants. It's the reason I can be a writer. It's the reason I can be a writer writing under my own name, which is a female name. I don't have to use a male name. It's the reason why I can earn a living and I can support my family. It's the reason why I don't need my husband's consent to purchase something. It's all of these things. And it's incredible to me that, you know, in my mother's generation, for instance, a lot of those things weren't possible. You know, this is within living memory. So I suppose for me, it was a really gradual evolution, and it was something it's a kind of truth I needed to seek out or start to glean for myself, because I didn't find that mainstream voices were talking about these truths.
Right. So it was a movement towards something where you realised to be kind of fully human.
Yeah, well, feminism is humanism. It's about 50% of the population being women having the same rights and opportunities as the other 50%, which is men. Not more rights and opportunities, just the same. You know, two different types of gender, or actually there's more than two different types of gender, but everyone with the same opportunities. And I guess growing up, I heard a lot about how all that was over. You know, again, like you said, the death of feminism, it happened ages ago. I think John Howard announced we were in a post-feminist era back in the 90s.
He'd know.
Of course he would.
Yes,
I mean,
of course he would.
It's 100 years since Emily Pankhurst tied herself to the railings, and we still don't have equal pay. We've got, what is it, 80 cents in the dollar. We're still hitting our head on the glass ceiling, getting concussion, and we're supposed to clean it while we're up there.
Well, I think
I think any woman who calls herself a post-feminist has kept her wonder bra and burnt her brains, because we still have so far to go.
Or I think of it as a gender tax. You know, if we've got 17% less that women working full-time are making than men, it's about $1 million in a lifetime. It's $1 million gender tax. And when I mention that to people, I'm not making this stat up. I'm not trying to cause trouble here. I'm just pointing out the facts. And what's interesting is people get very upset. It's reverse sexism to notice gender, as if noticing the problem is the problem. The problem isn't the problem. And the fact is that we do have a gender tax, and gender unfortunately matters, and we don't yet live in that beautiful world where we can leave all this stuff behind.
Right. But if we look back at Emily Pankhurst, I mean, it was simple in a way for the suffragettes to coalesce around one issue. It was the vote. And of course they had so many other changes to make. There was nowhere near resembling kind of equal workforce participation or any kind of maternal care, for example. And in the 1970s, you know, again, there seemed to be a debate about what the checklist was. And even in recent times, over the last couple of years in the United States in particular, the question has come up, can you be pro-choice and be a feminist? Can Sarah Palin call herself a feminist? The same issue has actually come up in Australia as well. So does it matter who calls himself feminist? Should this be something that we should be very keen about monitoring the parameters of who can come in or out?
Well, gosh, I think that some of the people like that, when they're like Sarah Palin, for example, it's just a phrase she's going through. You know, she thinks it's giving her some kind of kudos. Whereas in fact she doesn't really have a feminist stance. She doesn't ever say anything that is remotely politically...
But isn't that amazing that she wants to? Isn't it amazing? Feminism used to be a thing people go, I'm not a feminist, but and shy away. And now people are trying to use it to give credibility to their cause, as if they understand that most reasonable people now think that gender equality is a pretty cool thing.
But so how did it happen?
Well, I think we need a new word. Because the old word's just been so, I don't know, it's been used in so many sort of incorrect ways. And for younger women, to my daughter, her generation, they was, I'm not a feminist, but, you know, the usual. So I think we need to have a new word, something like, I call it the clitorati, or something like that, you know, that's funny and sexy, and we can rebrand, and then we can keep, Sarah Palin can stay over there and say her ridiculous things and not be part of our coven. I don't know, what do you girls think?
I think it's an incredibly difficult question. My real problem is with people branding themselves as feminists in order to get very anti-feminist agendas through, like the pro-life feminist. I'm pro-life the woman who's carrying the baby. And it's the Trojan horses, which is a real issue. So I think that there's elements of grey in there. You've got things like that, which is, you know, clearly, you know, puppets for things like religion, you know, but it's patriarchy and under different forms and oppression of women. But then you've also got, when it's just like a personal thing, it's like, I can think someone is beautiful, but they may not identify themselves as beautiful. So I may see what someone is doing as being very feminist, but they may not identify it as being feminist. So I think it's a really murky one, and I don't have an answer for that one, but I think we have to watch for Trojan horses.
It's a question of who you don't want in, rather than dividing who should be there. You don't want to be
what
there.
The motivation is for calling yourself a feminist.
I call myself a feminist, and I do that for a lot of personal reasons more than anything, and I'm happy when I hear other people call themselves feminists for the same kind of reasons. However, it's not enough. And in a way, I think talking too much about the label is a distraction. And we've got to look at the acts. How is this person claiming to be a feminist acting, or this person claiming not to be? Because there are plenty of people I know who do what I think of as really feminist work, who don't call themselves feminists. There are plenty of people who, as far as I'm concerned, are working directly against women's rights, who do call themselves feminists. And that's what it always comes down to me, is this person's acts.
But see,
what they're doing feminist. And I don't think we need to get too hung up in having some kind of whole discussion about, well, you've called yourself a feminist and you're not really, because I've got the checklist and your things don't mark off. Like, are you working towards women's equality and freedom, or are you working against it? And there are lines to be drawn here. For me, I really consider anyone who is going to tell women what they can and can't do with their own bodies is not someone who's working towards
or anyone who
women's
enables
liberation.
it. We'll agree with that.
And you can call yourself whatever you like. There's no feminist pope who's going to put an edict out. But that's not a feminist act to tell other women what they can do with their bodies.
Look, I get very uncomfortable when the discussion comes around to who is a better feminist. I don't like the idea of an exclusive club. I like the idea that we can accept and tolerate different ideas about feminism.
But can you tolerate someone telling you what you can do with your body?
Well, this is it. This is where you go, okay, if
there are lines.
There are lines. If someone is trying to legislate to take away women's rights, clearly this is not feminism. This is not pro-women or pro-women's rights. And I agree with that. But I think some discussions about who is a feminist and who is not starts to center on things which are more superficial and not these kind of foundation issues. And I find that happens perhaps a little bit too often. It's kind of, oh, are you part of the airbrushing is wrong feminist club? Or do you care about how many women are in boardrooms club? Or we're all feminists and that's okay. We can have different focuses. We can have different voices. And the great thing about feminism and so many other movements is it's a leaderless movement. We need to have different voices. And if you take any one individual and say this one individual is feminism, then it's problematic. And it's not true either.
I only shaved one armpit so I could, satisfy everybody.
Thrilled. Thrilled. Relieved. What about pro-choice in that scenario versus pro-life? Is that a core issue for you? I mean, it definitely is in the United States. The number one.
For me, I think you can be pro-life. You just can't be anti-choice and be a feminist simply because you're cutting off other people's options. And we do know, I'm a big believer in statistics and history and looking at facts rather than just how do I feel about this subject. And we have to put our emotions aside and know that women will always do what they need to do, and we need to be able to enable women to have reproductive rights. And when we cut that off, there are a whole bunch of awful consequences. So I think that we all need to enable women to be able to make those choices for themselves. Is it a core issue? Yeah, I think it is. But it's also fine to say, hey, there are downsides to abortion. Sure. There are downsides to lots of different things. I think when you legislate to stop people from doing what they need to do, then, that's a completely different issue.
Because you can't be anti-abortion, because abortion is going to continue. You can only be anti-legal abortion. And that's what's got to be clear.
I think Hillary Clinton did a wonderful speech on this. I encourage you to look it up on YouTube if you haven't. It's like we're not saying abortion is what women want to do on the weekend, okay?
Abortion enthusiasts.
There are no enthusiasts. This is an issue which has affected women for a long time. Reproduction is, it's really, it's the key issue, isn't it, between men and women. We have the ability to reproduce. We can carry the children. So, this is always going to be a sensitive issue, and I think Hillary Clinton said it very well when she, gave a lot of stats about how women will die if we take away that right, and that's not okay to me.
Right. So why do you think that people are now suddenly reclaiming this word, as you said? I mean, what's happened there? I mean, when I put up a call out on Twitter for questions people would like asked tonight, a number of people were saying, is there some kind of revival going on? Is feminism taking a new shape now? What's your take on that?
Well, I think for younger women, they have all the benefits of feminism but none of the battle scars. And they don't realise that we have to be constantly vigilant that we don't lose the rights that we've won. And for my own daughter, I can say what's bringing her to feminism now is she watched Mad Men. I don't know if you've watched Mad Men. Because when she could see the way women were treated as just objects and inferior and second-class citizens, that has started her thinking and been drawing her towards feminism. So, but using the word, I mean, any man who calls himself a feminist usually just wants a more intelligent bonk, in my view, So yes, but I think there is. I do feel with younger women, once they get out into the workforce too, once they realise that the man sitting next to them is doing exactly the same job is earning more money than them. And once they have a baby and they realise how discriminated they are in the workplace, all of that, well, of course, it radicalises them.
I think that's really true. I bought this little book in that someone gave me, and it's bits and pieces from Australian media during the 70s, and it's called Woman's Role. And there's things like this is from The Age in 1972. Flat to let would suit 2 or 3 girls sharing or 1 gentleman. 1972, British passport application form. Please note that a wife cannot use a family passport to travel without her husband. Here's a greeting card from 1972. A brand new baby brings a brand new joy, especially if it's a boy. This is a letter from Newcomers International magazine in 1972. Again, it is regretted that married ladies, unless separated, cannot be interviewed unless husband is in attendance. And I do think that as far as the revival, I'm not sure it's a revival, certainly a rejuvenation. Of stuff that's coming up. Right. But like I've got 3 little boys, and the best thing I can do as a feminist is to raise emotionally articulate, men, which I'm attempting to do. But they don't understand, they live with a gay man, and, they don't understand, the whole gay marriage thing. They actually don't understand feminism. Right. Because they just they don't see the downsides. But you have to alert them to these things. And even when you say, we earn 83 cents for every dollar that men earn. And this has been going on. This is going backwards. I did a great talk with Anne Summers last year in Perth, and she got up and she said, in 1986, the gap was narrower than it is now. And we talked afterwards, and she just said, I can't believe I've been saying this stuff for 20 years. It's the same stuff. We're talking about, the conversation that we had this afternoon about what's happening in North America, I think is a really important point about slipping backwards.
Well, I don't know if there's a revival going on, but I think the dialogue is becoming more aggressive. And I think, if anything, there are a lot of women, particularly in North America and watching overseas, watching what's happening with they call it the Republican war on women, the rolling back of women's rights, and they're freaked out because they didn't think this was possible.
Exactly.
They thought this was all won and it was done. So if that causes a revival in a way, I think that's a good thing. But damn, it's scary. It's scary to watch, Rush Limbaugh calling a woman a slut because she uses birth control, having such little understanding of what's going on, watching all male panels sit down and talk about women's birth control and reproduction. You watch it and you think, is this real? Is this comedy? Am I watching a
That's why we have to be vigilant.
Right. Do you see them as going together? So one second. Do you see there's kind of a greater antagonism and hostility? Oh, yes. And that the women are reacting to that? Or?
Yes. I think the dialogue's become more aggressive. I'm no expert, but what I've seen is that it's become more aggressive, and I think it's because women are noticing, hey, this stuff is happening. I thought this was one. This isn't right. And then, of course, because there's going to be a backlash to anyone mentioning anything about gender. In my experience, you will get negative reactions, and it's just become a kind of louder and more aggressive conversation.
Who was the shock jock here who made the horrible comment about the journalist?
I think you're talking about Kyle.
And isn't it true that the women women listeners made such a fuss that the advertisers pulled back? We do have muscle, we do have power, we do have weight.
But it took a lot of those incidents because money talks, and the show, made a lot of money. And it's the same. I can't really compare necessarily to Rush Limbaugh in the States, but there are some parallels. Shock jocks attract advertisers, and so they can get away with some of these statements. And I guess the good thing about the Kyle situation in Australia is that everybody kind of called it as unacceptable.
But he still got the job.
Yeah.
He lost nothing. Absolutely nothing. No sleep, no money, no position of power, no access to anything. But Tara, the point that you made this afternoon about saying there's all of this stuff doing about control of women's bodies in North America, it could easily slide over to here.
Of course
and
it
that
could.
was, all it will take will be certain people in position
But
of
I'm-
power.
but I'm
What's
watching-
Abbott's position on abortion, for example?
Oh, he's
Publicly.
yeah.
Right
So
now.
I want to ask
Look,
Em about this. Yeah.
I really want to say here that there's a lot of talk that young people don't understand feminism or that young people don't claim it. What I have noticed really, honestly, in the last 5 years even, is a massive resurgence in feminism, and it is being driven by young people. I'm repeatedly asked to speak for or on behalf of or about young feminists. I'm 35.
Right.
Some of the most inspiring activist feminists I know are 15 years younger than me. And their voices aren't being heard, but they're out there and they're working incredibly hard. And it's really frustrating because in a way, like kind of the history of, well, this wave of feminism anyway and the wave before it is women fighting to have their voices heard, you know, in the political system, in the legal system, in the medical system about their own bodies. And I talk all the time to this young generation of feminists who aren't being heard. And they are really angry, and a lot of it is the stuff, the global environment, the internet, they're really hooked into the femisphere, the blogosphere. They're paying attention, Australian young feminists, to what's happening in the United States. They know it could easily happen here. They're really alert and aware, and they are fighting. And it is this incredibly diverse movement too. I was just thinking before that quote that you mentioned earlier, the Rebecca West quote, anything differentiates me from a doormat. I've seen that all over the place, and the full quote is from a doormat or a prostitute. And actually some of the most powerful feminist discussion and activism happening in feminism is in sex work and are sex workers. And the fact that that part of that quote is now routinely left off, I think is actually saying a lot about younger women activists and their attempt to make the movement more inclusive and to listen to different kinds of women and to listen to men. I also hear a lot of cynicism about male feminists, and some of the stories I've heard from feminists the generations above mine, I can really understand that cynicism from their experiences. But something else I see in younger people is incredibly supportive, earnest young men and boys.
Isn't that
and
heartening?
the divide, it's fantastic. And in fact, the divide that I really see all the time in talking to young people is not between boys and girls or men and women. It's actually between feminists and anti-feminists. And there are both of both genders.
I find that's absolutely the case. I know plenty of people I would define as male feminists who define themselves as feminists.
Well, it's funny because the Oxford English Dictionary has never excised any words from the dictionary. They actually took the word new man out. They did, about 10 years ago. They said it was actually, they couldn't find any. It was a sort of media myth.
I just want to mention something I found today, talking about the internet and the blogosphere and all of this online activity about feminism. I went to Dr. Google today. I thought, what does Dr. Google think feminism is? The first listing I got was Wikipedia, their definition, fair enough. The second listing was feminism is evil, ! I swear to you, this was the second listing. The third listing was a grassroots organization where feminist thinkers were discussing things together on forums. But that was the second listing that came up. And I thought, this is an indication of where things are at. So whilst there is a movement out there, I'm very happy to be in touch with, can see those women and men who are fighting for women's rights and those issues of equality. There's a lot of hate out there. There's a lot of anger out there. And you know, there were some fantastic quotes that I found. Let's see if I can find any here. Feminists want authority just as Lucifer. Feminism is synonymous with immodesty. They had pictures of women which they would say were stereotypically mean-mouthed and angry, and they said this is the real face of feminism. And that is out there, and that was the second listing that came up. So we can sit on this panel, and hopefully there's a lot of people in the audience who understand why we're here, but there are people out there who are also very resistant to this stuff.
I just want to go back to Emily and follow up what you were talking about young people and sexuality. I'd actually like to talk to each of you about in your areas what the feminist issues are and what it means to be a woman in your environment. So you talk about active young people. I mean, what is it that they're fighting? What is it that we should be aware of?
Okay, the really exciting thing about young feminists and that movement is how diverse it is, and the acknowledgement that no one person or even one organisation can or should speak for every issue that women are up against, which I know leads some people to say, well, the feminist movement is so fragmented, but I really do see that as a strength because it means people are working in where they have actual knowledge and experience. But some of the top ones that come up, sexual violence is shockingly prevalent, and I don't think there's any way to know if it's getting more prevalent or if young women are becoming more comfortable speaking about it. But it is shockingly prevalent, and that is something that the slut walk movement, which there's been a lot of discussion about in the past year around the world, is one particular reaction to that. But there are plenty of others. That's one that's had a lot of publicity, and that is a huge issue. And the other thing that comes up a lot is pornography.
Yeah.
And it's a huge. I mean, we'd need another whole hour and a half just to even touch.
But can you fill us in a little?
All right. The basics of it are that you won't. You would be very hard pressed to find a teenager or even an adolescent who hasn't seen pornography. It's there. It's not going away.
So what does this mean for feminism?
It means a whole bunch of different things. There are some people who argue, and I think quite correctly, that it can actually be a really liberating and positive force. And I do think that sexual liberation can be a really important part of escaping from kind of oppressed ideas, particularly ones if you've grown up in a religious background, or for gay and lesbian teenagers. There's people I've known who may be in a country town and not have access to a community, and even seeing people being gay in a sexual sense, it can be a really powerful and affirming thing that can keep them hanging on till they can get the hell out of there. So there's a definite positive side. The really negative side to this, though, is that a lot of the mainstream, easily accessible, free pornography that's easily available is just the most vile, misogynist crap. And a lot of us can recognise that easily. Young people who don't have other sex education or other people to talk about or context for sexuality can begin to see this kind of sex as what you do.
As normal.
And so really the solution, and it's been said before, is better pornography, but also much more discussion about it and sex education. And when I talk to young people, I tell them that, porn is to sex what Glee is to being in a school choir. It's stage managed, it's polished up, it's set to look good, it's not what it feels like to be in it. And to have that kind of understanding is really, I think, the most important thing, because I do talk to girls whose first sexual experience has been absolutely traumatic, and not because the boy is a bastard who doesn't give a shit, it's he thinks he's doing the right thing.
Yeah. I mean, some young men are so shocked to know that women have pubic hair, because when they watch porn, of course, the women are all...
Yes.
And hello, I like my pubic hair. It's like having a little pet in my pants. I mean, but never hear me say this in any other context, but bring back Bush. Am I not right? Yes.
You're wrong.
Yes.
But it is strangely the same as the Victorian era.
Yeah, exactly.
When John
surreal,
Ruskin,
isn't
the
it?
famous art critic, could not consummate his marriage because he was so shocked to discover that his wife had pubic hair. And they went to court about it. It was a drawn-out case. Well, they have to all write these things about his horror upon discovering on the wedding night.
But he'd only seen kind of practical statues.
It was the airbrushing of the Victorian era.
Yes, exactly.
But the pubic hair thing is very interesting. And I'd love at some point to talk about the being oppressed by feminism in different ways that some people might feel.
Yes.
I fell in love 2 years ago with a guy I was in love with when I was 18, and when we got together, one of the things he did was ask me to marry him, and I don't believe in marriage, and I said, I won't marry you, but I will get a permanent lasered Brazilian, because it's cheaper, it lasts longer, and it's less painful. But the truth is, I had given a girlfriend a laptop of mine, and she gave me a voucher for Brazilian wax. And I'm just like, fair swap. And me being a writer, I just thought, all right, I'll do it just to see what it's like. And you know what? I loved it.
Oh, Palin.
I loved it. And I just thought, why have I never thought of this before? I didn't think that it was optional. So I thought, as soon as I can save up for it, I'm going to get it off permanently. And, and my girlfriends who all grew up as, this is a really important issue, because you're saying we want to have Bush. It's like, I don't. And people will say, there will be this discussion about teenage girls, they go, well, that's really bad that they're taking off their pubes and this is because of porn and because, you know, they feel pressured by other guys. But it's like, had I known that was option back then, I would not, then it just never even dawned on me.
But it's the option that's the thing.
Yes,
and
that's
goes the other way and
so
they
that's
don't know.
my point is that, like, yeah, sure, you can have your bush and I can have my project.
Well, I'd just rather wax lyrical, you know.
And speaking of which, what about what? I mean, I know there's the bigger feminist issues.
Should we cue stripping music?
Yeah, I know, right?
Is this time, Kathy?
Speaking of which,
I want to get back to what you were talking about.
The issues that are lyrical, the issues that are most pertinent to you. Now, I'm interested also in women writing, which I want to talk to all of you about, and Tara next to you as well. But what it means to be a female writer, which is basically, establishing a voice, which sounds really simplistic, but it can be a very confronting thing, and you can often find yourself pummeled from various directions. But also a comic voice, I think, is interesting because, you know, with Christopher Hitchens, the much loved and widely respected Christopher Hitchens, who wrote that piece in Vanity Fair saying women are just not funny.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm published in 14 different languages, and I go on book tour to all sorts of different countries in the world. And every country I've gone to, someone has said to me, what do you mean you write comedic fiction? Women aren't funny. Oh. And I think, why do men say this? They're obviously terrified what it is we're being funny about. Yeah. And they presume we spend the entire time talking about the length of their penises, which, you know, is not true because, you know, we also talk about the width, which after childbirth is obviously much more important. But, you know, anthropologists have told us that humour, it comes from the oldest part of the brain. They also tell us that women, in all societies of the world, women laugh more than men, especially in all female groups. And I think, you know, for women it's a survival mechanism. When you think of all the things we have to deal with, from starting when you get your period cramps and you're taken hostage by your hormones once a month, then you're pregnant, you know, where your breasts arrive in 5 minutes before you do. Then you've got childbirth where you're stretching your vagina the customary 5 kilometres. You know, and then you've got mastitis, and then you've got the menopause, and then, just when everything goes quiet, do you know what happens? You grow a beard. How can it be there? How? I'm getting a macrame hanging basket going on here. So, you either laugh or cry, right? So, yeah.
But I mean, as far as, you know, a comedic voice and humour is concerned, you know, they say women live in fear of men killing them and men live in fear of women laughing at them.
Yeah, right.
So it is a big threat, a big threat.
Yeah.
I remember a group of guys that I used to work with, and they were private school boys. I was a waiter in banquets when I was at university. And we would have great stouches because you'd be put with a guy, there'd be a girl on food, guy on drinks, and you'd work together all night. And we'd have great laughs separately. With these, you know, I'd be working with one guy one night, another guy another night, a guy another night. And I remember once the three of them were standing there together having a drink after work. And I went up and just did what I would normally do, like privately with each of them. And there was a bit of a kind of, do we laugh at her or not? And it was amazing to see that.
Earring.
Yeah, earring on this side.
Yeah, I'm on
first
step.
And Tara, can I ask you about as a crime writer as well? And I spoke to interviewed P.D. James last year and was completely fascinated by her because she's written so many books. She's still going. She's in her 90s. She's absolutely delightful. And she says that you know, that there is something that women can do better as crime writers in terms of observation and mystery, even though a lot of them still write under pseudonyms.
I was about to say, but she does publish under P.D. James.
Right.
She should publish under pseudonym.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of people are fascinated to find out that P.D. James is Phyllis. I often will get people who are really like, oh, I love him, he's such a great writer. You know, there are still, I write obviously under my own name in all countries except, strangely, Brazil. I'm T. Moss in Brazil. You wouldn't get very far into my books without realising that probably a woman wrote it just because of the female lead character. Not a lot of male writers write a female central character. Some write amazing female main characters, but not the story doesn't necessarily revolve around a female character. I do know a lot of wonderful female crime writers who center their books on a fantastic male character. But we have huge numbers of female authors here who write under pseudonyms, Alex Palmer, P.M. Newton. There's a slew of them. The crime genre, they still say that a tough, masculine-looking cover with a male name on it will tend to sell more, despite the fact that the crime genre is extremely popular with women. In fact, more women buy crime novels than do men, or fiction in general.
Yeah, they do.
So, I don't know what the answer is to that. I feel quite comfortable. I'm happy with my reading audience, and in terms of my own writing career, fantastic. But it does alarm me to know that so many women writers out there are struggling to get the recognition of the male counterparts in the industry.
And is this why you got into a stoush about the Stella Awards? Can you tell us about this? Which is being set up as a counterpart to the Miles.
I honestly don't know how I got into that stoush, because I have a blog, and I wrote a very casual entry in this blog about having just come back from the Sisters in Crime convention, She Killed Her, in Melbourne. Now, I've been a member of Sisters in Crime for 13 years. It's a women's crime writing group. It was founded in the States by Sarah Paretsky because 25 years ago she felt that there was some problems for female crime writers in the industry, and she wanted to kind of band these women together. So anyway, she started Sisters in Crime. So I came back from Melbourne, having done this festival, mentioned what a wonderful group of female authors that were there. It was really fantastic. Isn't it interesting that so many of them write under non-gender specific names? And oh, by the way, there's the Stella Prize that's just starting. And did you know about these gender statistics that Vida just put out? Now, Vida just had put out these stats looking at a lot of major literary publications and journals and the representation of female authors and male authors, and comparing them. I guess because they had a sneaking hunch about what they would find. And what they found was with a lot of the really major journals, it was about an 80-20 split. Some were worse, some were slightly better.
And it was reviewers as well.
It was reviewers, so male reviewers reviewing male books. It was really quite shocking. And when you read the stats, they had pie charts. You can look it up online. You look at these pie charts and you go,
it's stuck.
My God, it really stuck in my mind.
The Guardian did the same thing.
Yeah.
Did you see that amazing piece where they analysed?
It's really stuck.
Right. Yeah. Well, so I wrote this blog, and literally it was a casual blog just saying, oh, these are these stats, and I posted it. I got one response saying, oh, that's terrible, and the next one was, oh, interesting, Third one up was, I hate to rain on your parade, but this is just the kind of privileged whining that annoys the crap out of me. I went, oh, okay, and I thought, oh, just another internet troll. Unfortunately, this person was in the industry. It was a male reviewer of a prominent publication, and that really stuck with me because he actually identified himself as a literary reviewer in this comment, and I thought, my God, why are you so sensitive? I haven't come up with this stuff. I'm reporting it, almost without opinion in this blog. And there it began. There was 100 comments. They got more and more heated. What I found really interesting, it got, it spiraled out of control, really. But what I found interesting is the number of people who came onto the blog without reading all the comments and went, it's just a bunch of emotional women beating up on one man. And what was interesting is I decided, no, I'll do my own stats here. And I went through and picked the gender of the people commenting, and I found that it was about equal numbers of men and women saying, hey, these are real stats, and it's okay to talk about it. And yet people assumed, or certain people assumed, it was a bunch of emotional, cranky women causing a fuss and whining. And I found that really did seem to say a lot about what happens when you discuss gender. It's always this dismissal. You're privileged whiners. These stats don't matter. Why don't you look at some other issue?
So even if it's hard data, it's hard. You're emotional about that.
And even if you're just writing, I wasn't even writing opinion. I was writing, these stats. This is amazing.
Which have been globally reported.
Absolutely. So it was an introduction to me to the aggressive side of this conversation, and it did continue onto Twitter and other blogs, and I got some really quite nasty emails privately and responses publicly for just having been the messenger about a statistic which is established. And again, when I do bring up stats, and I did so the other day after I read that our representation of women in Parliament in Australia has slipped from 21st position to 38th position internationally over 10 years, which is unfortunate.
Right.
I wrote that, and you know, the first response was capital letters. You know, what's really shocking is that people even keep those stats because that's reverse sexism.
Of course.
And they were very angry at me.
Wow.
So it seems like they really want to shoot the messenger when we talk about gender.
Right. So we've spoken about political participation, we've spoken about resilience, porn, abortion, sexuality. I mean, is there any issue you think right now that should be at the forefront of what women are talking about, or feminists are talking about, and is not?
Gender representation in the media.
Yeah.
Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah.
About 5 years ago, I wrote an article in The Age and just talked about, you know, the disproportionate amount of rich, white, middle-aged, middle-class, straight or straight acting, God-fearing or pretending. Now, I mean, and even on the ABC has a charter which is about diversity, fair gender representation, being innovative and pioneering, and, you know, in Melbourne, our local ABC, on that 24-hour cycle, there is only one female broadcaster on
really
that,
outrageous.
and it's been like that since 2006. And
Same in Britain, by the way.
Even when the guys go on holidays, they get fill-ins more often than not who are also white, rich, middle-aged, middle-class, straight, God-fearing or pretending to. I remember that when I remember writing, and I wrote, probably about 5 years ago, on International Women's Day for the AIDS, saying, you know, and just looked at stats. And I said, in the last month, there's been 69 articles on the opinion page in this paper. Only 14 have been written by women. 4 by Maureen Dowd, so she's from abroad. And out of the other 10, 6 of them were sharing their experiences, and only 4 had actual opinions. Now, I'm sorry, but I cannot leave my house without tripping over a woman who would be fantastic with a column, fantastic in front of a microphone, fantastic in front of a camera, with her voice and her ideas and her take on the world. And why do we just dismiss it? And you know what's even worse is when they say, oh, they're given on merit, these jobs. It's like, how dare you? How offensive. What, do you not know of the ability of all of the women out there? And I'm not just talking about women, I'm talking about GLBTI, I'm talking about ethnics, I'm talking about renters, I'm talking about the elderly, I'm talking about youth. But let's just go 50-50. If you want to look at anything to kind of have a good idea about what's going on, you know how there's like, if you build a building, you do an environmental impact statement. When you look at a kind of a human endeavour, like a radio show or a television show or a newspaper, how about try a social impact statement? And how about have a look at the idea that we basically try for half women, half men, 10% GLBTI, 1 in 5 suffering a mental illness, 1 in 8 with a profound disability. And have a look at how that actually lines up. And you might see how out of whack it is and how complacent we are about it. And when you do mention it, like if I mention it, and I'll say, you know, I remember once, you know, Spics and Specs, you know, 5 men, 2 women, brew and transfer, 8 men, 1 woman, and then the Chaser Boys, all men, and people go, oh, you're just bitter, and you're just whingy because you want to be. It's like, no. Why am I being always accused? If I'm talking about gay marriage, if I'm talking about rights for the disabled and carers, if I'm talking about asylum seekers, no one's ever calling me bitter. But as soon as I talk about something like that, they think, oh no, it's all about me.
Yeah, when it comes to TV shows, we're up shit creek without a panel. You know.
Give
us our own show.
I'm glad I asked. And what about you, Emily?
Well, I totally agree, and it's a constant frustration. However, I think we've got to be aware too, I mean, this is the Writers' Festival. We're all here because we are writers as well as feminists. And if you ask a different panel or a different group of feminists who are not perhaps in this industry, that certainly wouldn't be their top concern.
So what would yours be?
My concern is sexual violence. That's what I see across all class groups, sex workers, non-sex workers, married women, single women, teenagers, adults, women in their 50s, in all kinds of communities. I did want to say, though, with what Catherine was saying just now, that I guess the really powerful thing with having those voices in the media, though, is all of those groups Catherine talked about. This is what they're writing about all these different issues. If they had those voices, if it wasn't all the same kind of person getting the column inches, speaking on the panels, then it's not a matter of me having to sit here and quickly go, and there's this issue, and there's this one, and there's this one, because those people would be having the voices in the paper to speak about them themselves.
That's absolutely true.
Linda Burns on the ABC, she says, and she's the only one who has a full-time job as a host of one of the programs, she has something like 800% more women callers.
Exactly.
Because they feel more comfortable being able to talk to her.
Yeah. I'm sure that's absolutely true. So, and I just do need to wrap it up, so I'm just going to go very quickly.
I'll be very quick. I mean, we're talking about what it's like for women in the West. We haven't talked at all about the developing world. In the developing world, it's contraception, education and nutrition. And, you know, contraception is the big issue.
Absolutely.
Because copulation equals population. And if you can break the menstrual cycle, you can help break the poverty cycle. Because if these girls are raped and they're having children at 9, 10, 11, their lives are over. That's it. And it just perpetuates the cycle. And of course, you know, one woman dies every minute in childbirth in the developing world. And women are fed last, they're fed least. If the mother dies, the child's taken out, the oldest girl's taken out of school, put into prostitution or domestic servitude. So, you know, here we have problems, but out there it is so definitely a man's world. So yeah, that's what makes me crazy.
And feminism is constantly wrestling with being white and middle class and Western.
Well, no, yes, except of course we're all want to change the whole world.
And this panel, to be fair, doesn't really argue against that. But I mean, it's true, and it does happen a lot. And it's a kick on that when women are given voices in things, that we do tend to be the ones that those white middle class men in power are most comfortable with as well. And that is certainly part of the problem.
And what about you, Tara?
Look, it's hard to pick an issue, but I would have to say, Emily, the issue of sexual violence and just physical violence in general is a major one, because it's a form of slavery in your own body when you don't feel safe in the world. I think it's a major issue. I'm also very interested in portrayals in stories, so media portrayal, but I would say beyond that, even just you know, all types of storytelling. I love the Bechdel test.
Oh, God, yes, I wrote that down,
test, which is just basically to pass the Bechdel test, you have to have at least 2 female characters who at some point talk about anything except a man. I mean, anything. It could be the laundry woman talking to the matriarch. It doesn't matter. And amazingly, the vast majority of films and often books do not pass that very simple test. In fact, last year's Oscar Best Picture lineup, 7 out of the 9 nominated films failed the Bechdel test. So now that I am switched on to that, I notice it. And it drives me a little bit insane, because it's so easy to pass that test. It's so easy. And yet you just don't have female characters talk to each other. And I think it's a kind of, it creeps into the psyche, you know.
And also so many of the female characters are waiting to be rescued by some knight in shining Armani. You know, girls, stand on your own 2 stilettos.
That's right. And it's fine to be the love interest. It's fine to have sex in films and have a sexy woman. Great. She can still have friends. She can still talk to other people.
And who's your favourite fictional feminist character then?
Oh, I don't have a favourite. I don't think I can pick one.
Becky Shaw.
Written by a man, strangely, but
Do either of you two have one?
Well, I was just in the Writers' Festival session this morning on Edith Campbell-Barry from Frank Mulhouse's trilogy, so written by a man again, but my personal feminist icon in Australian literature anyway.
Can I say Katie and Lacey?
Yes, you can. You can.
Can we just thank our fabulous feminist panel?
Thank you for coming, everybody.
We're all going to start ovulating at the same time.